The sapphire caught the afternoon light streaming through my apartment window, throwing tiny fractured rainbows across the hardwood floor. I held Derek's grandmother's ring between my fingers, watching it sparkle with a beauty that felt almost mocking now. 3 months had passed since he'd sent that cold, formal email demanding its return. 3 months since I'd discovered the truth. And in 2 weeks, he'd be marrying Vanessa Reed in some overpriced mountain resort, probably expecting me to mail this precious family heirloom back like a borrowed book. I smiled slowly, turning the ring one more time. He'd get his ring back. Just not the way he imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The whole disaster began on an ordinary Tuesday evening in Portland. I remember the exact moment because I'd just finished designing a logo for a local coffee roaster, one of those small freelance projects that kept my bank account barely functional while I built my portfolio. Derek was supposed to meet me at our favorite wine bar in the Pearl District to celebrate my landing a potential contract with a mid-sized tech company. It would have been my first major client, the kind that could transform my struggling graphic design work into an actual sustainable career. He texted at 5:47 saying he'd be late. Work emergency. The real estate development project in Lake Oswego needed immediate attention. I'd heard variations of this excuse dozens of times over our 2-year relationship, so I ordered a glass of Pinot Noir and waited, scrolling through design inspiration on my tablet. By 7:30, my wine glass had been refilled twice and my patience had worn thin. I paid my tab and decided to surprise him at the office instead, maybe grab takeout on the way. We could have our celebration dinner at his place. The development firm where Derek worked as a project manager occupied the 10th floor of a glass tower downtown. I'd visited enough times that the evening security guard waved me through without question. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual. Something felt off in a way I couldn't articulate. Maybe it was the wine on an empty stomach, or maybe some unconscious part of my brain had been collecting evidence I'd refused to consciously acknowledge. When the elevator doors opened, the office floor was mostly dark except for lights glowing from the conference room at the end of the hall. I heard her laugh before I saw anything. Vanessa Reed's laugh, bright and confident in a way that had always made me feel slightly inadequate. She'd been the interior designer on several of Derek's projects, someone he mentioned frequently with a particular enthusiasm that I'd told myself was purely professional admiration. They worked together constantly, sometimes late into the evening, coordinating furniture selections and spatial layouts for the luxury condos his company developed. The conference room door stood slightly ajar. I should have announced myself immediately, should have knocked and walked in with the casual confidence of someone who had every right to be there. Instead, I stopped just outside, frozen by the intimate tone of their voices. Derek's voice carried clearly through the gap. "I'm telling you, Vanessa, Helen's already asking when we're going to set a date. She keeps showing me her grandmother's ring like I'm supposed to just propose out of obligation." My hand instinctively touched the sapphire ring on my left finger. Helen Mason, Derek's mother, had presented it to me 6 months earlier at a family dinner, misty-eyed and sentimental. Her own grandmother had worn it, then Helen, and now it was meant to symbolize my acceptance into their family. Derek had proposed the following week, a romantic setup on the Willamette River waterfront that had felt like a fairy tale moment. "You don't sound excited about marrying her," Vanessa said, her voice carrying an edge of carefully calculated sympathy. There was a long pause. I pressed closer to the wall, my heart hammering so hard I worried they might hear it. "It's complicated. Natalie's sweet, she's supportive, but she's so passive about everything. No real ambition beyond her little design projects. My mother keeps talking about grandchildren and stability, like Natalie's the safe choice." "And what do you want?" Vanessa asked, her voice dropping lower, more intimate. "I want someone who matches my energy. Someone who understands the pressure of building something significant, who has their own drive and success. Someone like you." The silence that followed felt suffocating. I knew what was happening in that conference room without needing to see it. Part of me wanted to burst through the door, to confront them with righteous fury. Instead, I backed away slowly, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. I made it to the elevator before the tears started. Made it to my car before the full weight of what I'd heard crashed over me. Derek thought I was the safe choice. The passive one with little design projects that didn't matter. And his mother, sweet Helen, who'd welcomed me so warmly, apparently shared that assessment enough to pressure him toward marriage. I drove home in a daze, Derek's words echoing in my head. When I finally sat in my small apartment in northwest Portland, staring at the ring on my finger, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about Derek cheating or being attracted to Vanessa. This was about how he fundamentally saw me, how he'd probably always seen me. A nice girl. A safe backup plan. Someone without real ambition or drive. The rage came then, hot and clarifying. Derek arrived at my apartment around 9:30, carrying Thai food and apologies about the work crisis. I watched him set down the takeout containers, kiss my cheek with casual affection, and settle onto my couch like nothing had changed. He looked tired but satisfied, probably still riding the high of whatever had happened in that conference room. "How was your day?" he asked, opening containers of pad Thai and green curry. "Enlightening," I said quietly. Something in my tone made him look up. His expression shifted from casual contentment to wary concern in seconds. "Natalie, what's wrong?" "I told you I'd stop by the office," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "You weren't answering your phone." The color drained from his face in a way that confirmed everything. He didn't try to deny it or play innocent. Instead, he set down his fork and ran both hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times when dealing with difficult situations. "How much did you hear?" he asked finally. "Enough." I twisted the sapphire ring off my finger, feeling its weight in my palm. "Enough to know that I'm apparently the safe, passive choice with no real ambition. Enough to understand that your mother's been pressuring you into this engagement. Enough to realize you'd rather be with someone like Vanessa." Derek reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Natalie, listen. Those were just words." I was venting frustration about work pressure and my mom's expectations. "It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," I corrected him. "You don't love me, Derek. Maybe you never did. You love the idea of what I represent to your mother. Stability. Safety. Someone who won't challenge you or compete with your career." "That's not fair," he protested, but the argument sounded hollow even to him. I stood up, still holding the ring. "We're done. I need you to leave." He stood too, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Let's talk about this when you've calmed down. You're upset and reading too much into a private conversation." The condescension in his tone ignited something fierce in me. "I'm completely calm," I said coldly. "And I'm reading the situation exactly right. Get out of my apartment." "What about the ring?" he asked, and there it was. Not concern for our relationship or our future, but immediate worry about the family heirloom. I looked down at the sapphire in my palm, then back at his face. "I'll return it when I'm ready. Right now, I need you to leave before I say things we'll both regret." Derek left, but not before making several more attempts to minimize what I'd heard and convince me I was overreacting. After he finally walked out, I sat in the silence of my apartment, staring at that ring for hours. The smart thing would have been to return it immediately, to cut all ties cleanly. But something stopped me. Maybe it was petty vindictiveness, or maybe it was the kernel of a plan I hadn't fully formed yet. The next few days passed in a blur of ignored phone calls and desperate text messages from Derek. His tone shifted from apologetic to frustrated to eventually threatening legal action if I didn't return his grandmother's ring immediately. His mother called twice, her voice tight with barely concealed anger as she demanded the return of her family heirloom. I didn't answer any of them. Tessa Morgan, my best friend since college, showed up at my apartment on Friday evening with wine and pizza, having heard about the breakup through our mutual friend network. She found me surrounded by half-packed boxes, my laptop open to apartment listings in cities I'd never visited. "Please tell me you're not making major life decisions while emotionally devastated," Tessa said, setting down the pizza and surveying my chaos. I'm making major life decisions because I'm emotionally devastated, I corrected her. There's a difference. Over pizza and wine, I told her everything. The overheard conversation, Derek's assessment of my lack of ambition, his mother's manipulation, Vanessa's calculated sympathy. Tessa listened with increasing outrage, occasionally interrupting with creative suggestions for revenge that ranged from petty to potentially illegal. So what's your plan? She asked finally. Please tell me it involves something more satisfying than just ghosting him. I'm leaving Portland, I said, surprised by how certain I sounded. I'm taking my portfolio, my savings, and I'm starting over somewhere Derek and his opinions don't exist. And the ring, Tessa pressed. He's been blowing up social media about you stealing his grandmother's heirloom. His mom's telling everyone who'll listen that you're holding it hostage. I looked at the sapphire sitting on my coffee table, still catching light even in the dim apartment. I'll give it back, I said slowly. Eventually. When the time is right. Tessa grinned. I love when you get that look. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It means someone's about to regret underestimating you. Over the weekend, I made concrete plans. Denver, Colorado, became my target destination. It was far enough from Portland to feel like a genuine fresh start, but close enough that I could drive there with my belongings. The city had a growing tech scene, plenty of startups that might need branding and design work. Most importantly, it was a place where nobody knew me as Derek Mason's passive, unambitious ex-fiancé. I gave notice on my apartment, sold or donated most of my furniture, and packed everything essential into my Honda Civic. My savings account held about $4,000, enough for first month's rent and security deposit with a small cushion for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it felt like freedom. The night before I left Portland, Derek showed up at my apartment. I'd known he would eventually. He looked exhausted, his usual polished appearance rumpled and strained. Natalie, we need to talk, he said through the door. Please. Just 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He took in the packed boxes and bare walls with obvious shock. You're actually leaving, he said, sounding genuinely surprised that I was capable of such a decisive action. I am, I confirmed. Tomorrow morning. Because of what I said? Because of Vanessa? He ran his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture. Nothing even happened with her, Natalie. It was just talk, just frustration. I was going to work through my doubts and we could have moved forward. The thing is, Derek, I don't want you to work through your doubts. I said it calmly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. You were right about me. I was passive. I did let other people's opinions shape my decisions. But hearing you say it out loud made me realize I don't want to be that person anymore. So this is about proving something, he asked, a hint of condescension creeping back into his tone. This is about building a life where I'm not someone's safe backup plan, I corrected him. Where my ambitions matter, even if they don't look like what your mother thinks success should be. He was quiet for a moment, studying me like I was a stranger. Fine. If you need to run away and find yourself or whatever, I can't stop you. But I need my grandmother's ring back. My mother is making my life hell about it. I picked up the small velvet box from my coffee table where I'd deliberately left it visible. The sapphire gleamed inside, beautiful and symbolic and weighted with meaning. I'll return it, I said. But not yet. Derek's expression hardened. That ring is a family heirloom. You have no right to keep it. I have every right, I countered. You gave it to me. It represented a promise you had no intention of keeping. Consider it insurance that you'll think twice before dismissing someone as passive and unambitious again. His face flushed with anger. This is theft, Natalie. I can take legal action. Do it, I said, meeting his eyes directly. Explain to a judge how you gave your fiancé your grandmother's ring, then immediately started an emotional affair with your coworker. I'm sure that'll go well for you. We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Derek turned and walked out without another word. I heard his car start and drive away, and I felt nothing. No sadness, no regret. Just a quiet certainty that I was making the right choice. The next morning, Tessa helped me load the last boxes into my car. She hugged me hard, making me promise to call when I arrived safely. "You're doing the brave thing," she said. "Most people just stay in situations that make them small. You're choosing to become bigger." As I drove out of Portland with the sunrise painting the sky pink and gold behind me, I felt the weight of the past lifting. The sapphire ring sat in a small lockbox in my glove compartment, a tangible reminder of everything I was leaving behind and everything I was driving toward. I had no job waiting in Denver. No apartment secured. No plan beyond survival and reinvention. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something I'd chosen for myself, not something chosen for me by people who couldn't see my value. Derek's words echoed one final time in my mind as the Portland skyline disappeared in my rearview mirror. No real ambition. Little design projects. The safe choice. "Watch me prove you wrong," I whispered to the empty car, pressing down on the accelerator as Interstate 84 stretched out before me toward an uncertain but entirely mine future. Denver greeted me with an unexpected snowstorm in late March, the kind of spring weather that would have been impossible in Portland. My Honda struggled up the mountain passes, windshield wipers working overtime against the heavy wet flakes. By the time I reached the city limits, my hands ached from gripping the steering wheel and my savings had already taken a hit from an emergency tire replacement in a small town outside Cheyenne. The extended stay motel I'd booked online looked worse in person, situated along a highway access road where semi-trucks rumbled past at all hours. The room smelled like industrial cleaning solution trying to mask decades of cigarette smoke. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night, surrounded by everything I owned packed into boxes and suitcases, and allowed myself exactly 10 minutes of doubt. 10 minutes to wonder if I'd made a catastrophic mistake leaving behind the familiar disappointment of Portland for the unknown disappointment of Denver. When the timer on my phone buzzed, I opened my laptop and got to work. Apartment hunting in an unfamiliar city proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. My budget eliminated most options immediately. The affordable neighborhood seemed distant from anywhere I might find work, while the areas near downtown or the tech corridor required deposits I couldn't afford. After 3 days of viewing cramped studios and basement apartments with questionable electrical wiring, I found a place in Capitol Hill that barely qualified as habitable. The landlord, an older woman named Phyllis who wore velour tracksuits in various jewel tones, showed me the studio with apologetic commentary. "The building's old," she admitted as we climbed stairs that creaked ominously under our weight. "Built in 1928. The radiator heat is temperamental and the water pressure is terrible, but it's clean and the rent includes utilities." The studio was essentially one large room with a tiny bathroom and a kitchen area consisting of a mini fridge, a 2-burner stove, and exactly 18 inches of counter space. A single window looked out onto a brick wall. The hardwood floors showed their age with gaps between boards wide enough to lose small objects. But the ceiling was high, the walls were freshly painted white, and the rent was $650 a month. "I'll take it," I said, already calculating how I'd arrange my limited furniture to make the space functional. "Don't you want to think about it?" Phyllis asked, surprised. "See other places? This is the 7th place I've looked at. It's the first one that feels possible." She studied me with shrewd eyes that had probably seen hundreds of desperate renters make questionable decisions. "Running from something or towards something?" she asked bluntly. "Both," I answered honestly. Phyllis nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'll need first month and security deposit. You got a job lined up?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I have savings to cover 3 months' rent, and I'm a graphic designer. I'll find work." She handed me the rental application. "Fill this out. If your references check out, you can move in this weekend." The relief I felt signing that lease bordered on euphoric. I had a place to live, a foundation from which to rebuild. The apartment might be tiny and imperfect, but it was mine alone, free from Derek's opinions and his mother's expectations. Moving in took exactly 2 hours because I owned so little. A futon that would serve as both couch and bed. A desk I'd built from IKEA components years ago. A kitchen table that folded down when not in use. Boxes of clothes, design books, and art supplies. My laptop and external monitor. The essentials of a life I was reconstructing from scratch. Phyllis appeared as I carried up the last box, bearing a plate of cookies and practical advice about the neighborhood. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down that has decent Wi-Fi if yours goes out," she said. "Grocery store 3 blocks west. The bus stop on Colfax will get you downtown in 20 minutes. "Thank you," I said, accepting the cookies that turned out to be homemade snickerdoodles. "For taking a chance on someone with no job and probably questionable judgment." She shrugged. "I was in your shoes once, a long time ago. Sometimes the only way to figure out who you are is to go somewhere nobody knows who you were. Just don't prove me wrong by skipping out on rent." After she left, I arranged my furniture in the most efficient configuration possible, unpacked essentials, and then opened my laptop to face the daunting task of finding work. My portfolio website needed updating. My resume needed reframing. I'd been marketing myself as a freelance designer taking small local projects, but that approach wouldn't sustain me in a new city where I had no network or established reputation. I spent that entire first week rebuilding my professional presence. Updated my portfolio with my strongest work, removing anything that felt tentative or compromised by clients who didn't understand design. Rewrote my approach to emphasize brand strategy and visual identity, not just pretty graphics. Created case studies that demonstrated how design thinking had solved actual business problems for my Portland clients. Then came the harder part, actually finding opportunities. I applied to every design position posted in Denver, from junior designer roles at established agencies to marketing coordinator positions at startups. I reached out to every design studio and branding firm in the city with personalized emails explaining my background and requesting informational interviews. I posted my availability in online freelance communities and local Denver job boards. The responses were overwhelmingly silent. Occasionally I received automated rejections. More often, nothing at all. By the end of my second week in Denver, I'd applied to 47 positions and received 3 interview requests. 2 were for unpaid internships despite my 5 years of professional experience. The third was for a part-time retail position at an art supply store that paid $12 an hour. I took the art supply store job immediately, grateful for any income even if it barely covered my rent. The work was mind-numbing, restocking shelves and helping customers select paintbrushes and sketchbooks, but it gave structure to my days and forced me to leave the apartment. My co-worker at the store was a guy named Marcus who was working on his MFA in sculpture. He had that particular combination of artistic talent and practical desperation that I recognized immediately. "Let me guess," he said during a slow Tuesday afternoon shift. "You're way overqualified for this job and taking it because the actual design work isn't materializing as fast as you hoped." "Is it that obvious?" I asked, reorganizing a display of watercolor tubes by color family. "You alphabetized the entire acrylic paint section yesterday. Nobody does that unless they're aggressively overcompensating for feeling underemployed." We became friends through that shared understanding of dreams deferred and bills demanding payment. Marcus introduced me to the local art scene, dragging me to gallery openings and studio visits where I met other creatives trying to build sustainable careers. Most were cobbling together multiple part-time jobs and freelance projects, all of us pretending we'd chosen this precarious existence rather than having it chosen for us by economic reality. Through Marcus, I met other Denver transplants with similar stories of leaving behind places and relationships that had made them feel small. There was something simultaneously depressing and comforting about realizing I wasn't unique in my struggle. 6 weeks into my Denver life, I'd settled into a grim routine. Work at the art supply store 4 days a week. Apply to design positions constantly. Take on occasional freelance projects that paid embarrassingly little but kept my portfolio active. Eat cheap meals and skip social activities to conserve my dwindling savings. The isolation hit harder than I'd expected. In Portland, even during difficult times, I'd had Tessa and a network of friends from college and early career. Denver offered anonymous crowds and surface-level acquaintances. I could go entire weekends without speaking to anyone beyond transactional exchanges with baristas and grocery store cashiers. Derek continued texting occasionally, his messages oscillating between apologetic and demanding. Sometimes he claimed to miss me and wanted to try again. Other times he threatened legal action over the ring. I never responded, though I couldn't quite bring myself to block his number entirely. The ring remained in its velvet box in my desk drawer, a talisman of the life I'd left behind. Tessa called every Sunday evening, her voice a lifeline to continuity. "How's the grand reinvention going?" she'd ask with forced cheerfulness that couldn't quite hide her worry. "Slower than anticipated," I'd admit. "But I'm still here. Still trying. That counts for something. You haven't given up." Some days giving up felt increasingly appealing. The financial pressure was constant. My 3-month cushion had eroded faster than planned thanks to moving expenses and the reality that part-time retail work didn't come close to covering even my minimal expenses. I'd started selling belongings on local buy-sell trade groups. Art books I'd collected in college. Kitchen equipment I never used. A designer purse I'd bought during better times that now felt like evidence of a different person's life. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon in late May. I just finished a dispiriting shift at the art supply store and stopped at the coffee shop Phyllis had mentioned, seeking reliable Wi-Fi to apply for more positions. The place was crowded with the usual mix of remote workers and students. I found a small table near the window and opened my laptop, prepared for another evening of crafting personalized cover letters that would likely go unread. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" a voice asked. I looked up to see a man about my age, professionally dressed but slightly disheveled in a way that suggested a long day. He held a coffee in one hand and a laptop bag in the other, scanning the crowded cafe for available seating. "It's all yours," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. He settled in with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to working from coffee shops. We existed in companionable silence for almost an hour, both focused on our respective screens. I was deep into revising my portfolio presentation when my laptop battery died. I'd forgotten my charger. Of course. I must have made some frustrated sound because the man looked up. "Battery death?" he asked sympathetically. "The most inconvenient kind," I confirmed, starting to pack up my things. "What were you working on?" he asked. "If you don't mind me asking." "I'm procrastinating on quarterly projections and looking for any distraction." "Portfolio revision," I said. "I'm a graphic designer trying to break into the Denver market. It's going about as well as you'd imagine." He smiled, and I noticed he had the kind of face that transformed completely with genuine expression. "Tough market. A lot of established agencies and not much appetite for risk." "What's your focus?" "Brand identity and visual strategy." I spent the past few years doing freelance work in Portland but decided I wanted something more substantial. Turned out substantial opportunities don't just materialize because you want them. He laughed at that. "No, they definitely don't. I'm Brian, by the way. Brian Caldwell." "Natalie Harper," I replied, shaking his offered hand. "What brought you from Portland to Denver?" he asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that's probably too personal a question for coffee shop small talk." Something about his genuine interest made me answer honestly. Needed a fresh start. Left behind a relationship that wasn't working and decided I'd rather fail at building something new than succeed at staying comfortable in something that made me miserable. Brian nodded slowly. "I know something about that. I moved here 2 years ago from Phoenix after my business partnership dissolved badly. Sometimes burning bridges is the only way to build something better." We talked for another hour, long past when either of us needed to remain in that coffee shop. Brian worked as a business strategy consultant, helping small companies optimize operations and plan for growth. He'd left a position at a larger consulting firm to start his own practice, a leap that had been equal parts terrifying and necessary. "The hardest part isn't the actual work," he explained. "It's the constant uncertainty. Never knowing where the next client is coming from, whether this month's success means anything for next month's survival. That's exactly it, I said, feeling understood in a way I hadn't since leaving Portland. Everyone acts like if you're struggling, it means you're not good enough or not trying hard enough. Nobody talks about how much of success is just timing and luck and being in the right place when opportunity happens to appear. We exchanged business cards as the coffee shop began closing. Brian's was professionally printed with a clean, sophisticated design. Mine was a DIY creation I'd printed at home, already showing wear at the edges. The contrast felt emblematic of our different levels of professional establishment. I should let you go, Brian said, but I'd like to continue this conversation. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee again? Or maybe actual dinner where we're not surrounded by people working on laptops? I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. After weeks of isolation and struggle, the prospect of connection with someone who seemed to genuinely understand the challenges I faced was too appealing to refuse. Our first real date happened 3 days later at a small Italian restaurant in Baker neighborhood. Brian arrived straight from a client meeting, still wearing a suit but with his tie loosened and top button undone. We ordered pasta and cheap wine and talked for 3 hours about our respective career struggles, our reasons for leaving comfortable situations, the gap between ambition and reality. He didn't try to fix my problems or offer patronizing advice. Instead, he shared his own failures with refreshing honesty. The clients who'd declined to pay him. The business loan he'd taken out that hung over his finances like a threat. The family members who still asked when he was going to get a real job with benefits and stability. My father built a successful construction company, Brian explained over tiramisu we'd decided to split. He can't understand why I'd walk away from steady employment to do consulting work that might not exist in 6 months. We barely speak anymore because every conversation becomes him lecturing me about fiscal responsibility. My mother couldn't understand why I chose design over something more practical, I offered. She always saw it as a hobby rather than a legitimate career. Hearing that perspective from someone who was supposed to support me made it hard to believe in my own choices. Do you still doubt those choices? Brian asked, studying my face. Every day, I admitted. But I doubt the alternative even more. Going back would mean admitting they were right about me. I'd rather struggle forward than retreat backward. He smiled at that, raising his wine glass. To struggling forward. May we eventually struggle our way to something resembling success. We became friends first, bonding over shared professional anxieties before any romantic element developed. Brian started inviting me to networking events where I met other entrepreneurs and small business owners. Some of them needed design work. I landed 3 small projects that way, nothing major but enough to supplement my art store income. In return, I helped Brian with his own business materials. His website was functional but bland. His presentation decks were cluttered with too much text and not enough visual hierarchy. I redesigned his brand identity as a favor, creating something clean and professional that better reflected the strategic thinking he offered clients. "You're undervaluing yourself," he said when I tried to refuse payment for the work. "This is worth at least $3,000 from any decent agency. Consider it repayment for introducing me to people who might actually hire me," I countered. He insisted on paying me something, so we compromised on a reduced rate that still felt like more money than I'd seen in months. Our friendship continued building through summer. Coffee shop work sessions where we'd sit across from each other, tackling our respective projects in comfortable silence. Long walks around Capitol Hill where we discussed business strategies and career goals. Occasional dinners that felt like dates but remained in that ambiguous territory where neither of us wanted to risk complicating the professional relationship we developed. The shift happened gradually. A hand lingering on my shoulder when Brian brought me coffee. His jacket draped over my shoulders when we walked home from dinner on a chilly August evening. The way conversation stretched later into the night, neither of us wanting to end the connection. We were sitting on the steps outside my apartment building one evening in September when he finally addressed the tension. "I need to tell you something," he said, his tone serious enough to make my heart rate spike. "I value your friendship enormously. The way we work together, support each other's careers, it's unlike any professional relationship I've had." "But," I prompted, recognizing the setup for rejection. But I'm also incredibly attracted to you, he continued, meeting my eyes. And I'm terrible at maintaining professional boundaries when personal feelings are involved. So I need to know if that's something you'd want to explore, or if I should work on compartmentalizing better. I kissed him instead of answering with words. It felt like the most natural progression in the world, friendship deepening into something more substantial. We dated carefully at first, both aware that mixing business and romance had the potential to destroy everything we'd built separately and together. 3 months into our relationship, Brian proposed something unexpected. "I've been thinking about starting a different kind of consulting practice," he said one evening over dinner at my tiny apartment. "Not just business strategy, but integrated brand strategy. Helping companies figure out not just how to operate efficiently, but how to present themselves in ways that actually resonate with their audience." "That's essentially what designers do," I pointed out. "Visual identity that reflects brand positioning." "Exactly. Which is why I think we should do it together. Combine strategic consulting with design implementation. Most small companies either get good strategy with terrible execution, or beautiful design with no strategic foundation. We could offer both." The proposal terrified and excited me in equal measure. Starting a business together meant intertwining our professional and personal lives completely. But it also meant building something that reflected both our strengths, creating the kind of integrated approach we'd both been searching for in our separate careers. We spent weeks developing the concept. Late nights at my apartment or his, mapping out service offerings and pricing structures. How we divide responsibilities based on our respective expertise. What kind of clients we'd target. The minimum revenue we'd need to sustain 2 people. "I can front most of the startup costs," Brian offered. "I've got some savings left and I can take out a small business loan if needed." "I need to contribute equally," I insisted. "This can't be your company that I just work for." We compromised on a sweat equity arrangement. Brian would cover initial expenses while I contributed through developing all our marketing materials, website, and visual identity. Once we started generating revenue, we'd adjust the ownership split to reflect equal partnership. The decision to officially launch felt momentous. We chose a name that reflected our integrated approach. Filed the necessary paperwork. Created a website that showcased our combined capabilities. Reached out to everyone in our networks announcing our new venture. The response was tepid at first. A few informational meetings that didn't convert to contracts. Several proposals that received polite rejections. We supplemented with our existing freelance work while slowly building credibility. Our first real client came through a referral from one of Brian's former consulting contacts. A sustainable packaging startup that needed both strategic positioning and visual identity development. We threw everything into that project, working 16-hour days to deliver something exceptional. When they sent the testimonial praising our integrated approach and asking to refer us to other companies in their network, we celebrated with cheap champagne in my apartment. "We're actually doing this," I said, still half disbelieving. "Building something real." Brian pulled me close. "We're building something real together. That's the differ." The sustainable packaging startup changed everything for us. Within 3 weeks of their enthusiastic testimonial, we had 4 new inquiries from companies in their network. All of them wanted the same thing: strategic positioning combined with visual identity that actually reflected their business values. It turned out there was a genuine gap in the market for what we offered, and we'd stumbled into it almost accidentally. Brian and I quickly realized that working out of coffee shops and our respective apartments wasn't sustainable anymore. We needed real office space where we could meet clients without apologizing for the surroundings. The search led us to a shared workspace in the River North Arts District, a renovated warehouse building that housed about 20 small businesses and creative studios. The space we could afford was barely more than a glorified closet, just enough room for 2 desks, a small meeting table, and some filing cabinets. But it had exposed brick walls, good natural light from a window overlooking the street, and most importantly, it felt professional. We hung our business name on the door in vinyl letters I'd designed, and suddenly we looked like a legitimate operation rather than 2 people with laptops and dreams. Our work rhythm developed naturally. Brian would meet with clients first, conducting discovery sessions to understand their business challenges, competitive landscape, and growth objectives. He'd return with pages of notes and strategic insights that I'd then translate into visual concepts. We'd collaborate on presentations that showed clients how brand identity could support business strategy, each element serving a purpose beyond aesthetics. The approach resonated particularly well with startups and small businesses that had been burned by agencies that delivered beautiful design without understanding the underlying business context. We weren't the cheapest option, but we could demonstrate clear value in ways that justified our rates. By December, 6 months after launching the business, we were fully booked through February. I'd quit my job at the art supply store, something that felt both terrifying and triumphant. Marcus threw me a small goodbye party, genuinely happy that I'd found the opportunity I'd been working toward. "You're going to forget about us struggling artists once you're wildly successful," he joked over cheap beer and pizza. "I'll remember," I promised. "And I'll hire you to create sculptures for our office once we can afford real space." The financial pressure eased gradually. We weren't wealthy by any measure, but we reached that crucial threshold where income consistently exceeded expenses. I could buy groceries without calculating every item's cost. Pay rent without panic. Even start rebuilding the savings I depleted during those first desperate months in Denver. Brian and I moved in together that winter, partly for practical reasons and partly because we were spending every waking moment together anyway. We found a 2-bedroom apartment in Uptown, using the second bedroom as a home office for evenings and weekends when work inevitably spilled beyond normal hours. Living together revealed all the small incompatibilities that romantic dates had glossed over. Brian was constitutionally incapable of putting dishes directly into the dishwasher, preferring to stack them in the sink first. I had a habit of leaving design books and sketches scattered across every flat surface. He needed the thermostat set to Arctic temperatures while I preferred something above freezing. But we also discovered how well we balanced each other in ways that mattered more than household habits. When I spiraled into self-doubt about a design direction, Brian could articulate the strategic reasoning that made it right. When he got lost in analytical details, I could pull back to the bigger picture of what clients actually needed to see and feel. We made each other better at our respective work, which in turn made our partnership stronger. Our first major argument as both business partners and romantic partners happened over a potential client in March. A mid-sized real estate development firm wanted to hire us for a complete rebrand. The contract would be our largest to date, nearly $40,000 for a comprehensive project that would take 3 months. "This is exactly the kind of client we've been building toward," Brian said, reviewing their proposal request. "Established company, solid budget, connections throughout the industry. Landing this could open doors to similar projects." I stared at the company name on the proposal, my stomach twisting. Mason Development Partners. Derek's firm. They'd apparently expanded from Portland to Denver, opening a satellite office to manage their Colorado properties. The contact person listed was someone named Jennifer Walsh, the Denver office director, but I knew Derek would be involved somehow. He was too ambitious not to oversee expansion projects personally. "We can't take this," I said quietly. Brian looked up from his laptop, confused. "Why not? This is perfect for us." I explained then, finally sharing the full story I'd been avoiding. Derek Mason was my ex-fiancé. His mother had manipulated him into proposing. I'd discovered him with another woman. The ring I still had sitting in a box in my desk drawer belonged to his grandmother. Taking his company as a client would mean working directly with him, probably extensively. Brian listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding to something more complicated. "How long have you had his grandmother's ring?" he asked finally. "Almost a year now." He kept demanding it back, threatening legal action. I told him I'd return it when I was ready. "And are you ready?" I met his eyes. "I don't know. Part of me wants to mail it back and be done with the whole situation. Another part of me isn't ready to let go of what it represents." "Which is what?" Brian asked gently. "Revenge? Justice? Proof that you mattered?" "Maybe all of those things," I admitted. "Does that make me petty?" "It makes you human," he said. But we need to decide about this project based on business considerations, not emotional ones. Can you work professionally with someone who hurt you that badly? I thought about it seriously, weighing pride against pragmatism. The project would establish us in a new market segment. The revenue would let us hire additional help, maybe even expand to proper office space. Turning it down because of personal history would be letting Derek continue to shape my decisions. I can do it, I said finally. If you think it's the right move for the business, I can keep it professional. We submitted our proposal the following week, a comprehensive plan that outlined strategic positioning and visual identity development. I crafted every page with extra care, wanting to demonstrate our capabilities beyond any doubt. 2 weeks later, Jennifer Walsh called to schedule an in-person meeting. The Mason Development Partners office occupied a modern building in the Denver Tech Center, all glass and steel reflecting the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Jennifer turned out to be a sharp woman in her 40s with the kind of efficient warmth that put people at ease while maintaining clear boundaries. She led us through their current marketing materials, explaining the disconnect between their Portland brand identity and their Denver market expansion. We need something that feels established but not stodgy, she said. Professional but approachable. We're competing against developers who've been in Colorado for decades. Brian asked strategic questions about their target demographics and competitive positioning while I took notes and absorbed the visual landscape of their existing materials. We were about 40 minutes into the meeting when Derek walked in. He'd changed since I last saw him. Lost weight in his face that made his features sharper. Dressed more expensively than his Portland days, suggesting the expansion was going well financially. His eyes found me immediately, widening with shock before he managed to school his expression into professional neutrality. Derek Mason, he introduced himself to Brian, extending his hand. I oversee our multi-market operations. Jennifer mentioned we were meeting with a new branding firm today. Brian Caldwell, Brian replied smoothly, shaking Derek's hand. And this is my business partner Natalie Harper. The emphasis on business partner was subtle but deliberate. Derek's eyes flicked to my left hand, noting the absence of an engagement ring but also registering the professional context of my presence. Natalie, Derek said, his voice carefully controlled. I didn't realize you'd moved to Denver. About a year ago, I replied, matching his professional tone. Started fresh and built a new career. Brian and I launched our consulting practice 9 months ago. Jennifer looked between us, sensing the undercurrent but too polite to acknowledge it directly. Why don't we continue with the presentation, she suggested. Brian took over then, walking through our strategic approach with the kind of confident expertise that came from doing this presentation dozens of times. I pulled up visual examples on my laptop, showing how strategic positioning translated into design decisions. We worked in practice synchronization, each anticipating the other's points and building on them seamlessly. Derek watched mostly in silence, his expression unreadable. Only once did he interrupt, questioning a strategic recommendation about targeting younger buyers. Brian handled the objection smoothly, presenting data that supported our approach while acknowledging Derek's concerns. By the end of the hour, Jennifer was nodding enthusiastically. This is exactly the kind of integrated thinking we need, she said. Most firms give us either strategy or design, but never both working together. We left the meeting with a promise that they'd make a decision within the week. In the parking garage, I finally allowed myself to exhale the tension I'd been holding. You were incredible in there, Brian said, pulling me into a brief hug. Completely professional even though that had to be difficult. He looked older, I said. Tired. Success apparently isn't agreeing with him as much as he expected. Or maybe he realized what he lost, Brian suggested. Either way, we made a strong impression. The decision will be based on our capabilities, not your history with him. 3 days later, Jennifer called to offer us the contract. We celebrated with an actual nice dinner, not takeout or cheap wine but a proper restaurant where we toasted to our growing business with glasses of champagne that didn't come from the grocery store clearance section. Working with Mason Development over the following months proved less awkward than I'd anticipated. Most of our contact was with Jennifer, who appreciated our work and advocated for our recommendations internally. Derek appeared occasionally at review meetings, offering input but mostly deferring to Jennifer's judgment. I caught him watching me sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite decode. Not longing exactly, but something like reassessment. As if he was seeing me clearly for the first time and surprised by what he found. The project progressed smoothly. We developed a brand identity that honored Mason Development's Portland roots while positioning them as forward-thinking in the Denver market. The visual system was sophisticated but accessible, professional but not corporate in a stale way. Jennifer loved it. Their board approved it. Even Derek admitted it exceeded his expectations. The final presentation happened in June, almost exactly a year after Brian and I had met in that coffee shop. We walked Jennifer and her team through the complete brand guidelines, showing applications across every touch point from business cards to building signage. "This is transformative," Jennifer said, her enthusiasm genuine. "You've given us a foundation to build the next phase of our growth. I'll be recommending you to every company in our network." After the meeting ended and Jennifer's team dispersed, Derek lingered. He waited until Brian stepped away to take a phone call before approaching me. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Just for a minute." I glanced at Brian, who nodded slightly, then followed Derek to an empty conference room down the hall. "You've done well for yourself," Derek said once the door closed. "The business, your partnership with Brian. You were right about having ambition. I was wrong to dismiss what you were building." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, meaning it despite everything. "But I'm not doing this to prove you wrong. I'm doing it because it's the life I wanted to build. I know that now." He ran his hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of discomfort. "Vanessa and I didn't work out. Turns out the excitement of an affair doesn't translate well to an actual relationship. She left after 6 months for someone with better connections in the industry." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. The Derek standing before me seemed diminished somehow, as if success had cost him something essential. "My mother asks about you sometimes," he continued. "She regrets how she handled everything. Not that regret changes what happened." "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "But I appreciate you telling me." He looked at me for a long moment. "I should have defended you that night at the office. When she was disparaging your art and your ambitions. I should have told her she was wrong, that you had more integrity and vision than she could recognize." My silence was its own betrayal. The apology settled something in me I didn't know still needed settling. "Thank you," I said. "That actually means something." Derek pulled a small envelope from his jacket pocket. "I wanted to give you this." Inside was a check made out to me for $5,000. "What's this for?" I asked, confused. "The ring," he said. "I realized I was never going to legally compel you to return it, and honestly, you earned it by putting up with my family's manipulation. Consider it payment for emotional damages or whatever helps you accept it." "I don't want your money, Derek," I said, trying to hand back the check. "Then donate it. Use it to grow your business. Whatever feels right. But please, I need my grandmother's ring back. Not for me, but for my mother. It's the one thing I can do to try to make amends with her for how badly I've handled everything." I studied his face, seeing genuine contrition beneath the professional veneer. "All right," I said finally. "I'll return the ring. But not because you're paying me or threatening me. Because I'm ready to let go of what it represented." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you, Natalie. Genuinely." We arranged for me to mail the ring to his Portland address the following week. When I finally packed it up, wrapping the velvet box carefully and addressing the package, I felt lighter. The ring had served its purpose as a tangible connection to the past I was supposed to be moving beyond. Keeping it any longer would mean I was still defining myself in relation to Derek's betrayal rather than the life I'd built despite it. Brian found me sealing the package that evening. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Letting it go?" "Like closing a chapter I'd been pretending was already finished," I admitted. I thought leaving Portland was enough, but I'd been carrying this resentment around like proof of something. Proof that I mattered enough to be hurt, maybe. Or proof that he'd made a mistake choosing someone else? And now, Brian prompted gently. Now I have different proof, I said, gesturing around our apartment, our shared life, the business we'd built together. I don't need his regret or his mother's apology to validate my choices. The life I have now does that. He kissed the top of my head. For what it's worth, you've impressed the hell out of me every single day since we met. Not because you proved anyone wrong, but because you had the courage to build something true to yourself. The business continued growing through that summer and fall. The Mason development project led to referrals exactly as Jennifer had promised. We hired our first employee, a recent design school graduate named Melissa who brought fresh energy and competent execution to projects that had been stretching us too thin. Brian and I started discussing long-term planning. Where we wanted to take the business in 5 years. Whether we wanted to stay small and boutique or scale up significantly. How to balance growth ambitions with maintaining the integrated approach that made us distinctive. We also started discussing more personal futures. Marriage came up organically during a weekend trip to the mountains, not as a dramatic proposal but as a natural extension of the partnership we'd already built. I want to spend my life with you, Brian said as we hiked through aspen groves turning gold with autumn. Not because you complete me or any of that romantic nonsense, but because you make me want to be better at everything I do. And because I genuinely like who I am when I'm with you. I feel the same way, I said, linking my fingers through his. We should probably make it official at some point. We got engaged without a ring, both of us agreeing that we'd rather put the money toward growing the business than expensive jewelry. When we did eventually choose rings, we selected simple matching bands that cost a few $100s and felt more meaningful for their modesty. Planning a wedding felt overwhelming given our work commitments, so we opted for something small and practical. A ceremony at the courthouse with just a handful of friends, followed by dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. Tessa flew in from Portland, thrilled to see how dramatically my life had transformed. Marcus came with his girlfriend, joking that he'd known I'd end up successful despite my pessimism during those art store days. We kept the ceremony brief and focused on promises that reflected our actual partnership. Brian vowed to respect my creative instincts even when they conflicted with practical considerations. I promised to trust his strategic judgment even when uncertainty made me want to retreat to safer choices. We both committed to building something together that honored what each of us brought to the partnership. No elaborate speeches about destiny or soulmates. Just straightforward acknowledgement that we'd chosen each other deliberately and would continue choosing each other through whatever challenges came next. The dinner afterward was relaxed and joyful, full of stories and laughter from people who'd witnessed various stages of our respective journeys. Tessa pulled me aside at one point, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I'm so proud of you," she said fiercely. "When you left Portland, I was terrified you were making a mistake. But you built exactly the life you were meant to have." "I couldn't have done it if you hadn't supported me leaving," I reminded her. "You helped me see that staying would have been the real mistake." Our wedding night was spent in the same apartment we'd been sharing for months, nothing romantic or extraordinary about it except the satisfaction of having formalized what already felt permanent. We fell asleep discussing a proposal we needed to finish for a Monday morning presentation, our conversation drifting from business to personal and back again without clear boundaries. That was our marriage in microcosm. Work and life so thoroughly integrated that separating them seemed pointless. We were partners in every sense, our successes and struggles shared equally. The real breakthrough came 18 months after our wedding, during what should have been an ordinary client meeting. We'd been invited to pitch for a regional healthcare network that wanted to rebrand their entire system of clinics and hospitals. The contract was worth $250,000, more than we'd ever handled for a single project. Brian and I spent 3 weeks preparing, researching healthcare trends and patient experience data, developing strategic frameworks that went beyond visual identity into organizational culture and communication strategy. We knew we were competing against established agencies with healthcare portfolios, firms that had credentials we couldn't match. Our advantage had to be the integrated approach, showing them something bigger than they'd asked for. The presentation took place in a boardroom overlooking downtown Denver, 15 decision-makers arranged around an enormous conference table. Brian opened with strategic context while I queued up visual demonstrations on the screen. We'd rehearsed until the presentation felt like a conversation rather than a pitch, each of us building on the other's points seamlessly. Halfway through, the chief marketing officer interrupted with a challenging question about implementation timelines. Before Brian could respond, I pulled up a detailed project plan I'd created, showing phased rollout that would minimize disruption while maximizing impact. The CMO nodded slowly, impressed by the forethought. We left that meeting exhausted but cautiously optimistic. 2 weeks later, they chose us. Not the established agency with the impressive portfolio, but us. The underdog consulting practice that had started in a shared workspace barely bigger than a closet. The healthcare project consumed the next 8 months of our lives. We brought on 3 additional contractors to help with execution while Brian and I focused on strategy and creative direction. The workload was relentless, pushing us to our limits individually and as partners. We had our first serious fight over that project, a late-night argument in our home office about whether to push back on a client request that would compromise the design integrity. I wanted to hold firm on our recommendations. Brian worried about damaging the relationship with our largest client. We both said things we regretted, frustration with the pressure boiling over into criticism of each other's judgment. I slept on the couch that night, both of us too stubborn to apologize immediately. The next morning, we sat down over coffee and worked through it like a business problem. What was the core disagreement? What did we each need from the other? How could we find a solution that preserved both the work quality and the client relationship? We compromised on a middle approach that satisfied neither of us completely but felt defensible to both. More importantly, we established a framework for handling future disagreements when the pressure made everything feel more intense than it actually was. The healthcare rebrand launched in phases throughout the spring, each rollout generating positive responses from patients and staff. The local business press covered it as an example of how thoughtful branding could improve healthcare experience. We started getting inquiries from other healthcare systems, other large organizations that had noticed our work. By our 3rd anniversary, both personal and business, we'd outgrown our shared workspace and moved into proper office space in the same building where we'd started. This time we had 3 rooms, a main work area for our growing team, a dedicated conference room for client meetings, and a private office for Brian and me to focus on strategic work. We hired carefully, bringing on people who understood our integrated philosophy and could execute at the quality level we demanded. The team grew to 8 full-time employees plus regular contractors we called in for specialized projects. Revenue crossed 7 figures for the first time, a milestone that would have seemed impossible during those early desperate months. Success brought new challenges we hadn't anticipated. Managing people required different skills than executing client work. Financial planning became more complex with payroll and overhead costs. We needed systems and processes to maintain quality as we scaled, things that felt restrictive after years of informal collaboration. Brian thrived in the management aspects, discovering he had genuine talent for developing talent in others. He could identify what each team member needed to grow and create opportunities for them to stretch their capabilities. I struggled more with delegation, wanting to maintain hands-on control over creative decisions even when it created bottlenecks. "We're holding people back by not trusting them," Brian said gently after I'd revised a designer's work for the 3rd time on a relatively straightforward project. "You hired capable people. Let them be capable." "What if they make choices I wouldn't make?" I asked, voicing the fear that made delegation so difficult. "Then the work will be different than if you'd done it yourself." "That doesn't automatically mean worse. Sometimes it might even be better because they bring perspectives you don't have." Learning to let go of creative control while maintaining quality standards became my biggest growth challenge. Gradually, I discovered that Brian was right. The work our team produced wasn't identical to what I would have created, but it was often excellent in ways I wouldn't have considered. Trusting them freed me to focus on higher-level strategy and the most complex projects that genuinely needed my direct involvement. The business success brought personal comfort that still felt slightly surreal. We moved from our uptown apartment to a house in Wash Park, a modest 3-bedroom that felt palatial compared to where we'd started. I bought art supplies without checking prices. We took actual vacations where we didn't work the entire time. Small luxuries that represented enormous progress from eating ramen and calculating whether I could afford bus fare. Tessa visited that summer, staying for a long weekend to see our new house and meet the team at our office. Walking through our space with its busy hum of productive work, seeing our business name on the door and our client list on the wall, she shook her head in wonder. "Remember when you were sleeping on my couch, trying to decide if Denver was a terrible mistake," she said. "If someone had told you then that this was waiting 3 years in the future, would you have believed them?" "Not even a little bit," I admitted. "I was just trying to survive each day and not give up." The idea that it would lead to this felt completely impossible. That night over dinner, Tessa asked the question I'd been avoiding thinking about too directly. "So when are you going to deal with the Derek situation completely?" "I have dealt with it," I protested. "I returned the ring, moved on, built a completely different life. What else is there?" "Closure," Tessa said bluntly. "You ran into him once during a professional project and it was awkward but manageable. That's not the same as being fully finished with how that chapter of your life ended." "I don't need dramatic confrontation," I argued. "I'm happy. He's presumably moved on. Why reopen old wounds just for some symbolic closure?" "Because you still tense up when his name comes up in conversation," Tessa observed. "Because you still check his social media every few months even though you pretend you don't. Because some part of you is still carrying around the version of yourself that he dismissed, and you won't fully let her go until you face him from a position of complete confidence." Her words bothered me enough that I brought it up with Brian later. "Do you think I need closure with Derek?" I asked. "Like, actual face-to-face acknowledgement of how things ended?" Brian considered carefully before answering. "I think you've built an incredible life that has nothing to do with him. But I also think you're still proving something, even if you won't admit it. You push yourself harder than necessary sometimes, like you're trying to demonstrate worth to an audience that's no longer watching." His insight struck deeper than I wanted to acknowledge. I'd thought leaving Portland and building success was enough to erase the sting of Derek's dismissal. But maybe Tessa and Brian were right. Maybe some part of me was still performing for people whose opinions shouldn't matter anymore. The situation resolved itself in an unexpected way that September. We received an invitation to speak at a business innovation conference in Aspen, one of those networking events where successful entrepreneurs shared their stories with aspiring business owners. The organizers had noticed our work in the healthcare sector and wanted us to present on integrated brand strategy. Brian and I debated whether to accept. Public speaking wasn't our strength, and preparing a conference presentation would consume time we didn't have. But the exposure would be valuable, potentially opening doors to larger national clients beyond our Colorado base. We agreed to do it, spending weeks crafting a presentation that balanced strategic insights with practical applications. The conference was scheduled for mid-October at a resort hotel in the mountains, one of those events where the stunning location was half the appeal. The invitation arrived by mail a week before the conference, elegant cardstock with embossed lettering announcing the upcoming wedding of Derek Mason and Amanda Richardson. The ceremony would take place at the same Aspen resort where we'd be speaking, the weekend immediately following the conference. I stared at the invitation for a long moment, processing the coincidence. Derek was getting married. At the same location where Brian and I would be presenting about our business success. The universe apparently had a sense of dramatic irony. "Are you okay?" Brian asked, reading over my shoulder. "I think so," I said slowly. "It's just weird that after all this time of consciously moving on, the universe keeps engineering these intersections." "We don't have to go to the wedding obviously," Brian said. "We'll be leaving right after the conference anyway." "I know," I agreed. "But the invitation feels like something. Like a test maybe, or an opportunity for that closure everyone keeps insisting I need." "What do you want to do?" he asked, leaving the decision completely to me. "I want to focus on our presentation first," I said. "The conference is what matters. We can decide about the wedding afterward." The week before we left for Aspen, I had coffee with Phyllis, my former landlord who'd become an unlikely friend over the years. She'd followed my journey from that cramped Capitol Hill studio to business success with the pride of someone who'd taken a chance on a desperate stranger. "You've got that look again," she observed as I stirred sugar into my coffee with unnecessary focus. "The same one you had when you first came to Denver. Like you're preparing for battle." I told her about the conference presentation and the wedding invitation, the uncomfortable convergence of past and present. Do you think people ever really move on from the things that hurt them? I asked. Or do we just get better at pretending the wounds don't exist? I think moving on is overrated, Phyllis said bluntly. The things that hurt us shape who we become. The question isn't whether you've moved on from Derek, it's whether you've integrated that experience into a complete version of yourself. Whether you can look at who you were then and who you are now and see a coherent story instead of a before and after. Her perspective shifted something in my thinking. I'd been treating my Denver life as a rejection of my Portland self, proof that Derek had been wrong about my ambitions and capabilities. But maybe the healthier approach was recognizing that both versions were me. The woman who'd been hurt and the woman who'd rebuilt were the same person at different points on a continuous journey. Brian and I drove to Aspen on a Thursday afternoon, the route taking us through mountain passes ablaze with fall colors. The resort was predictably luxurious, the kind of place that catered to people for whom money was no obstacle. We checked into our room and spent the evening rehearsing our presentation one final time. The conference opened Friday morning with a keynote about innovation in challenging markets. We attended various sessions throughout the day, networking with other business owners and gathering insights we could apply to our own growth. Our presentation was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, giving us time to observe the conference dynamics and adjust our approach. Friday evening featured a cocktail reception where attendees mingled in business casual attire. Brian and I were discussing healthcare technology with a potential client when I spotted Derek across the room. He was laughing at something his companion said, looking relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen during our Mason development interactions. The woman beside him was striking, tall with auburn hair and the kind of effortless elegance that came from genuine confidence rather than careful construction. Amanda Richardson, presumably, his fiancée. She touched his arm while speaking to another couple, her body language suggesting comfort and affection. That's him, I said quietly to Brian. Derek. With his fiancée apparently. Brian glanced over casually. They look happy together. How does that make you feel? I waited for jealousy or resentment to surface. Instead, I felt only mild curiosity and relief. They did look happy, in a way Derek and I never had. Our relationship had been built on his mother's expectations and my desire to be chosen, not on genuine compatibility or shared vision. I feel fine, I said, surprised to realize it was true. Actually better than fine. I feel completely neutral, like he's just another person I used to know rather than someone who shaped my entire life trajectory. That's probably the closure everyone's been insisting you need, Brian observed. The ability to see him happy without it affecting your happiness at all. We didn't approach Derek that evening, and he didn't seem to notice us in the crowded reception. We left early to finalize our presentation, feeling confident about our material but wanting to rehearse the timing once more. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and crisp mountain air. I woke early, too nervous about the presentation to sleep late. Brian found me on our room's balcony, watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold and pink. You're going to be brilliant today, he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. We're going to be brilliant. This is what we've been building toward. Our presentation slot was at 2 in the afternoon, in one of the larger conference rooms that could accommodate about 200 people. As attendees filtered in, I recognized several faces from the previous day's networking events. The room filled steadily, eventually reaching near capacity. Brian opened our presentation with personal stories about our respective journeys to Denver, setting context for how our partnership had formed. I transitioned into visual examples of our work, showing before and after comparisons that demonstrated how integrated strategy and design created compound value. We alternated smoothly, building on each other's points and fielding questions with the easy rapport that came from years of collaboration. The healthcare case study generated particular interest. We showed not just the visual rebrand but the strategic framework that had guided every decision, how we'd aligned organizational culture with patient experience goals. Several audience members took photos of our slides, always a positive sign. Toward the end of our presentation, I noticed Derek slip into the back of the room. He stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. Amanda was with him, looking professionally interested despite this not being her industry. We concluded with key insights about building authentic partnerships, whether in business or life. The distinction between collaboration and compromise. The importance of both strategic thinking and creative execution. How the best solutions came from integrating different perspectives rather than choosing between them. The applause was enthusiastic, sustained longer than the polite appreciation most presentations received. Several people approached afterward with business cards and questions about our availability for consulting projects. We spent an hour networking, exchanging contact information and discussing potential collaborations. Derek waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. His expression was complicated, mixing pride with something that might have been regret. "That was impressive," he said simply. "The work you've built, the way you presented it. You've clearly found exactly what you were meant to be doing." "Thank you," I replied, meaning it without emotional charge. "I appreciate you saying that." Amanda stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm Amanda Richardson. Derek mentioned he knew you from Portland. It's wonderful to see what you've accomplished." Her warmth seemed genuine, lacking the calculation I'd sensed from Vanessa years ago. This was someone comfortable in her own success, not competing for validation. "Congratulations on your wedding tomorrow," I said. The invitation was a nice surprise. Derek looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't sure you'd get it, or if you'd want to come given our history. But Amanda insisted we should invite you, that enough time had passed." "I'm glad she did," I said, and realized I meant it. It feels like appropriate timing, actually. A chance to acknowledge how much has changed for both of us. We chatted for a few more minutes, surface conversation about the conference and the Aspen scenery. Brian joined us, shaking Derek's hand with genuine friendliness rather than territorial posturing. We were all adults who'd moved past old dramas, capable of civility if not friendship. As we parted ways, Derek paused. "For what it's worth, Natalie, I'm sorry for how I handled everything back then. You deserved better than my weakness and my mother's manipulation. Seeing what you've built makes it clear that you never needed someone to validate your worth. You had it all along." The apology landed differently than I'd expected. Not triumphant or vindicating, just sad for time we'd both wasted being people we weren't meant to be. "I appreciate that," I said. "And I hope you and Amanda have a wonderful wedding and marriage." Genuinely. That evening, Brian and I debated whether to attend the wedding ceremony the next day. Our flight back to Denver wasn't until evening, so schedule wasn't the obstacle. The question was whether showing up carried more meaning than staying away. "What do you want to do?" Brian asked, lying beside me in bed as we watched mountain shadows lengthen across our room. "I think I want to go," I admitted. Not to prove anything or make any statements. Just to close that chapter completely by witnessing him commit to someone else and feeling genuinely happy for him. "Then we'll go," Brian said simply. Together. The wedding ceremony took place in a glass pavilion overlooking the mountains, autumn sunlight streaming through windows that framed the peaks like natural artwork. Brian and I arrived early enough to find seats toward the back, where we could observe without drawing attention. The setting was elegant without being ostentatious, reflecting a thoughtfulness that suggested Amanda's influence. Guests filed in gradually, a mix of business associates and family members I recognized from my time with Derek. Helen Mason arrived wearing champagne silk and a satisfied expression, playing the role of mother of the groom with practiced grace. She didn't notice me in the crowd, too focused on greeting guests closer to the front. The ceremony began promptly at 4. Derek stood at the altar looking genuinely nervous, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable and authentic. When Amanda appeared at the entrance, his expression transformed into such obvious love that I felt happy for him despite everything. Amanda walked down the aisle with confidence and joy, her dress simple and sophisticated. When she reached Derek, they joined hands with an intimacy that spoke to genuine partnership. The officiant spoke about commitment and growth, about choosing each other daily rather than relying on initial passion to sustain a relationship. Their vows were personal and specific, mentioning inside jokes and shared challenges I knew nothing about. This was their story, completely separate from the history Derek and I had shared. Listening to them promise futures I wasn't part of, I felt only peace. When the officiant announced them married and they kissed to enthusiastic applause, I found myself clapping along sincerely. Brian squeezed my hand, understanding without words that something had shifted in me during that ceremony. The reception moved to an adjacent ballroom decorated with seasonal flowers and candlelight. We'd planned to leave after the ceremony, but something made me want to stay a bit longer. Brian sensed my need and agreed without question, always reading my emotional landscape with remarkable accuracy. We found our assigned table, discovering we'd been seated with other business acquaintances rather than family. The placement felt deliberate, acknowledging our presence without forcing uncomfortable proximity. Dinner was served as speeches began, Derek's best man offering funny stories and Amanda's sister speaking about her patience in waiting for the right person. Helen Mason's speech was brief and gracious, welcoming Amanda to the family with warmth that seemed genuine. She spoke about Derek's journey to finding true partnership, never once mentioning past relationships or failed expectations. Whatever lessons she'd learned from her manipulative behavior with me, she'd apparently integrated them into supporting this new union. After dinner, dancing began with Derek and Amanda's first dance. They moved together naturally, smiling and whispering to each other throughout the song. Other couples joined gradually, filling the dance floor with celebration. Brian extended his hand to me. "Dance with me," he asked. "Not because it's expected, but because I want to hold you while surrounded by all this happiness we found despite everything." We swayed together on the edge of the dance floor, not particularly graceful but completely content. Over Brian's shoulder, I caught Derek's eye briefly. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture that contained apology and closure and mutual recognition that we'd both found better matches. The small velvet box in my purse felt suddenly significant. I'd brought the sapphire ring with me on this trip, unsure why but following instinct. Now the reason became clear. "I need to do something," I told Brian quietly. "Will you wait here for just a moment?" He released me with complete trust, understanding that whatever I needed to do was important. I found a quiet corner near the gift table where Helen stood alone, observing the celebration with maternal satisfaction. "Mrs. Mason," I said softly, approaching carefully. She turned, surprise flickering across her face when she recognized me. "Natalie. I didn't realize you were here." "Derek and Amanda were kind enough to invite us," I explained. "I wanted to offer congratulations. And to return something that should have come back to you long ago." I pulled out the velvet box and opened it, revealing the sapphire ring that had represented so much pain and promise years ago. Helen's eyes widened as she recognized her grandmother's heirloom. "I should have returned this sooner," I said honestly. "I kept it for reasons that made sense at the time but ultimately just kept me tethered to a past I needed to release. It belongs with your family, with someone who'll appreciate its history without the baggage I attached to it." Helen took the box with trembling hands, tears gathering in her eyes. "I owe you an apology, Natalie. A real one, not filtered through Derek or time. I manipulated a situation I had no right to interfere with, and I hurt you deeply in the process. Watching you present yesterday, seeing what you've accomplished, I realize how wrong I was about your potential and your worth." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, feeling years of resentment finally dissolve. "I've built a good life, one I'm proud of. Part of me wants to say I couldn't have done it without that hurt pushing me forward, but that's not quite true. I could have built something good regardless. Your interference just changed the location and timeline." "You're gracious to frame it that way," Helen said softly. "I hope Derek and Amanda appreciate how rare that kind of grace is." "I hope they never need to test it," I said with a small smile. "I hope they just get to be happy together without the complications that defined earlier relationships." We parted with a brief embrace that felt like genuine closure rather than performative forgiveness. Walking back to Brian, I felt physically lighter, as if I'd been carrying weight I hadn't consciously recognized. "Ready to go?" Brian asked, reading my expression. "Ready," I confirmed. "We have an early flight and a business to run and a life to get back to." We slipped out quietly during the dancing, leaving Derek and Amanda to their celebration. The drive down from the mountains felt different than the drive up had days earlier. We'd arrived preparing to prove something. We left having released the need to prove anything at all. That night in our own bed in Denver, Brian asked how I felt about everything that had transpired over the weekend. Complete, I said after thinking carefully. Like I'd been reading a book and finally reached the last page. The story made sense. It had resolution. Now I can put it on the shelf and move on to whatever comes next. And what comes next? He asked, pulling me closer. More of this, I said simply. Building our business, supporting our team, taking risks together. Living a life that's authentically ours rather than a reaction to anyone else's expectations or dismissals. The sapphire ring had served its purpose, holding my past until I was ready to release it. Returning it at Derek's wedding hadn't been about grand gestures or dramatic statements. It had been about recognizing that my worth had never depended on his recognition, and my success had never been about proving him wrong. I'd simply built something true to myself, found someone who valued partnership over hierarchy, and created a life where ambition and authenticity could coexist. That was victory enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.